The morning sun cast long shadows across Kensington Palace gardens as Kate Middleton watched her children play, unaware that her world was about to change forever. What started as whispered criticisms from a group of visiting dignitaries would soon trigger a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of royal protocol. Behind the perfectly manicured hedges, a silent guardian had been watching, listening, and preparing to do something that would leave the entire world speechless. This is not just another royal story. This is the untold account of how one moment of cruelty toward a devoted mother unleashed a response so unexpected, so powerful, that would redefine what it means to protect the crown. The royal guard who witnessed everything that day would make a decision that broke centuries of tradition, challenged the establishment, and proved that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of loyalty come from the most unexpected places. What you're about to read will change everything you thought you knew about life behind palace walls. The April morning started like any other at Kensington Palace. Kate Middleton stood at the tall windows of the nursery, watching the gardeners tend to the roses that would soon bloom in spectacular fashion. Her 3 children were scattered around the room, each absorbed in their own world of imagination and play. Prince George was building an elaborate castle with his blocks. Princess Charlotte was having an animated conversation with her collection of stuffed animals, and little Prince Louis was attempting to master the art of walking in a straight line, his chubby arms stretched out for balance. Kate smiled as she observed them, her heart swelling with the kind of pure love that only a mother could understand. These quiet moments had become precious to her, especially given the increasing demands of royal duties and public appearances. The palace was expecting a delegation of foreign dignitaries later that morning, and she knew that soon the peaceful sanctuary of family time would give way to formal protocols and careful conversations. Margaret Thornfield, the head nanny who had been with the family for over 2 years, bustled into the room carrying a tray of fresh fruit and small sandwiches. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that had quickly earned Kate's trust and gratitude. Margaret had raised children in several noble households before coming to serve the royal family, and her experience showed in the way she could anticipate needs before they were even expressed. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret said with a gentle curtsy, "shall I prepare the children for their morning lessons, or would you prefer they continue their free play?" Kate turned from the window, her face lighting up with warmth. "Let them play a little longer, Margaret. There's something magical about watching them just be children, don't you think?" Margaret nodded, understanding completely. She had witnessed many parents in her years of service, but few displayed the genuine joy and hands-on involvement that Kate showed with her children. The Duchess wasn't content to simply appear for photo opportunities or formal events. She was present for breakfast conversations, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and triumphant first steps. "The delegation from the European Cultural Foundation will be arriving within the hour," Margaret reminded her gently. "They're particularly interested in discussing the children's education initiatives you've been championing." Kate nodded, her expression shifting to one of focused determination. The education project was close to her heart, a comprehensive program designed to support early childhood development across the Commonwealth. She had spent months researching, consulting with experts, and developing proposals that could make a real difference in children's lives. Today's meeting was crucial for securing the funding and international cooperation needed to make her vision a reality. As if sensing the change in atmosphere, the children began to gather around their mother. George, now 8 years old, had developed an awareness of royal duties that sometimes made Kate's heart ache with how quickly he was growing up. He understood that certain times required different behavior, and he had become protective of his younger siblings during formal occasions. "Mummy, do we need to be extra good today?" Charlotte asked, her bright eyes looking up with the kind of directness that often caught adults off guard. Kate knelt down to her daughter's level, smoothing a strand of hair behind Charlotte's ear. "You're always good, my darling. Just remember to use your indoor voices when the visitors come, and Maybe show them that beautiful painting you made yesterday. Charlotte beamed with pride, and Kate felt that familiar tug of maternal satisfaction. These were the moments that mattered most to her, far more than any formal recognition or public praise. She was determined to raise her children with a sense of normalcy despite their extraordinary circumstances. The sound of vehicles arriving in the courtyard signaled the approach of their guests. Kate rose and smoothed her navy dress, checking her reflection in the ornate mirror that had witnessed generations of royal preparations. She had chosen her outfit carefully, professional yet approachable, embodying the modern royal image she worked so hard to maintain. "Margaret, would you mind staying close by during the meeting? I know the children are comfortable with you, and it might help if they need anything." "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Should I bring them to the drawing room for introductions?" Kate considered this carefully. She believed in including her children in appropriate aspects of royal life, helping them understand their roles while protecting their childhood innocence. "Yes, but only briefly. I want our guests to see that this isn't just policy for me, it's personal." The delegation consisted of 5 individuals, each representing different aspects of European cultural and educational initiatives. Dr. Helena Morrison, a distinguished woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, led the group. She had spent decades in educational policy and had a reputation for being brilliant but demanding. Alongside her was Count Alessandro Bertrand, a man whose family had been involved in cultural preservation for centuries, and 3 other representatives from various foundations and government bodies. As they were escorted into the palace's magnificent drawing room, their conversation was polite but measured. These were people accustomed to dealing with royalty, yet there was an underlying tension that suggested this meeting held particular importance for all involved. Kate entered the room with practiced grace, immediately engaging each guest with personal attention and genuine interest in their work. She had done her homework, researching each individual's background and contributions to their respective fields. This wasn't merely diplomatic courtesy. She truly wanted to understand their perspectives and find common ground for collaboration. "Dr. Morrison, I've read your recent paper on early intervention programs in rural communities. The results from your pilot program in Scotland were remarkable," Kate began, her eyes lighting up with authentic enthusiasm. Dr. Morrison seemed pleasantly surprised by this level of preparation. "Your Royal Highness, I'm impressed that you've delved into such specific details. Many policymakers focus only on broad concepts, because broad concepts don't help individual children," Kate replied. "I believe we need to understand the nuts and bolts of how these programs actually work in practice." As the conversation developed, Kate excused herself briefly to collect the children for introductions. She found them in the nursery with Margaret, George helping Louis with a puzzle, while Charlotte practiced her curtsy in front of the mirror. "Remember, just a quick hello, and then Margaret will bring you back here," Kate instructed gently. The children followed their mother down the corridor, their small footsteps echoing against the marble floors. George walked with the bearing of a boy who understood his future responsibilities, while Charlotte skipped beside him, and Louis toddled along, occasionally reaching for his mother's hand. When they entered the drawing room, the transformation in atmosphere was immediate. The formal diplomatic tone softened as the adults saw the real faces behind the policy discussions. George offered a polite bow, Charlotte executed her practiced curtsy with obvious pride, and Louis simply waved with the uninhibited joy of a toddler. "These are my children," Kate said, her voice carrying a warmth that needed no translation. "George, Charlotte, and Louis. They're the reason I'm so passionate about early childhood development programs." Dr. Morrison leaned forward slightly, her professional demeanor giving way to genuine curiosity. "And how do you balance your royal duties with hands-on parenting?" Kate's answer came without hesitation. "I don't see them as separate things. Being a mother informs everything I do in my public role. These programs we're discussing, they're not abstract policy to me. They're about creating opportunities for children like mine and for children whose circumstances are very different from mine. Count Bertrand nodded approvingly. It's refreshing to work with someone who understands that cultural and educational initiatives must be grounded in real human experience. After the children returned to the nursery with Margaret, the conversation deepened into specifics of funding, implementation timelines, and international coordination. Kate demonstrated a grasp of details that impressed even the most seasoned policy experts in the room. She had clearly invested significant time and energy into understanding not just the vision, but the practical challenges of making change happen. However, as the meeting progressed, subtle shifts began to occur in the group's dynamic. Dr. Morrison began making observations that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried undertones of criticism. She commented on the challenge of maintaining academic rigor while accommodating modern parenting philosophies. Count Bertrand mentioned the importance of traditional values in child rearing in a way that seemed pointed. Kate maintained her composure, continuing to engage professionally with each point raised. But outside in the corridor, someone else was taking note of the increasingly pointed nature of these comments. Sergeant James Mitchell had served in the Royal Guard for 12 years, but his current assignment as personal protection officer for the Duchess and her children had given him insights into royal life that few people ever witnessed. He was stationed just outside the drawing room, close enough to respond to any security concerns, but also positioned where he could hear the conversation clearly. James was a man of few words, having learned early in his military career that observation often revealed more than interrogation. He had grown up in a working-class family in Manchester, the son of a factory worker and a primary school teacher. His path to the Royal Guard had been earned through exceptional service in the military, including tours in Afghanistan that had taught him to read situations quickly and trust his instincts about people's true motivations. Over the months of protecting Kate and the children, James had developed profound respect for the Duchess. He had seen her comfort Charlotte after nightmares, patiently teach George about responsibility and kindness, and maintain her sense of humor even during the most demanding days. He had watched her prepare for meetings like today's, staying up late to read reports and research, driven by genuine desire to make a difference rather than mere obligation. As he listened to the increasingly critical tone from some of the delegates, James felt his protective instincts sharpening. These weren't direct threats to physical safety, but he recognized another kind of attack when he heard it. The comments about modern parenting philosophies and traditional values were building towards something, and his experience told him it wasn't going to be pleasant. Inside the drawing room, Dr. Morrison was becoming more direct in her criticisms. Your Royal Highness, while your passion is admirable, some of us in the education field have concerns about celebrity involvement in serious policy matters. There's a difference between good intentions and qualified expertise. Kate's response remained diplomatic but firm. I understand that concern, Dr. Morrison. That's precisely why I've spent the past year working with experts, reading research, and visiting programs to educate myself. I don't claim to be an academic expert, but I do bring a platform that can amplify important work and a perspective as a parent who wants better opportunities for all children. Count Bertrand leaned back in his chair with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, but there's also the question of whether someone who has never experienced real challenges in child rearing can truly understand what working families need. It's easy to advocate for programs when you have unlimited resources and staff to handle the day-to-day realities of parenting. The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air. Kate felt the sting of the criticism, but maintained her composure, her years of public life having taught her to navigate such moments with grace. I think my children would disagree with the assessment that I'm not involved in day-to-day parenting, she replied evenly. But more importantly, this isn't about my personal experience. It's about creating systems that support all families, regardless of their circumstances. Dr. Morrison pressed further, her voice taking on a condescending tone. Your Royal Highness, surely you must recognize that your approach to child rearing however well-intentioned, is quite permissive by traditional standards. Allowing children such freedom of expression, encouraging them to speak so openly with adults, these modern approaches may not prepare them for the realities of their future roles. James shifted position outside the door, his jaw tightening as he listened to the thinly veiled attack on Kate's parenting. He had seen those children's joy, their confidence, their kindness towards staff and visitors alike. He had watched Kate's patient guidance help them navigate difficult moments and celebrate their successes. What these delegates were calling permissive was actually thoughtful, engaged parenting that was raising remarkable young people. Back in the drawing room, Kate felt her protective instincts as a mother rising, but she continued to respond with diplomatic restraint. I believe children thrive when they feel heard and valued while still learning appropriate boundaries and respect. My goal is to raise children who understand their responsibilities, but also feel confident expressing themselves and connecting with others. But at what cost to discipline and proper behavior? Count Bertrand interjected. Traditional methods of child rearing have produced generations of successful leaders. Perhaps there's wisdom in not abandoning time-tested approaches for contemporary trends. The criticism was becoming more pointed and personal, moving beyond policy disagreement into direct judgment of Kate's character and capabilities as a mother. James could hear the strain in her voice as she continued to respond professionally to what were essentially personal attacks disguised as academic discourse. One of the other delegates, Dr. Sarah Chun, seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation and attempted to steer it back to productive territory. Perhaps we could focus on the specific program implementations and how to measure their effectiveness. But Dr. Morrison wasn't finished. Dr. Chun raises a good point about measurement. How do we evaluate success when the foundational approaches may themselves be questionable? If we're building programs based on parenting philosophies that prioritize children's immediate comfort over long-term character development, what kind of results can we really expect? Kate's hands tightened slightly in her lap, but her voice remained steady. I think there's a false choice being presented here between caring for children's emotional well-being and building their character. The research I've studied suggests that children who feel secure and heard are actually better equipped to handle challenges and develop strong moral foundations. Research can be interpreted many ways, Dr. Morrison replied dismissively. But practical observation tells a different story. Children need firm boundaries and clear expectations, not constant validation and accommodation. James had heard enough. In 12 years of service, through diplomatic crises and security threats, he had maintained professional detachment and followed protocol without question. But watching Kate endure this personal attack while trying to advocate for children's welfare triggered something deeper than professional duty. These people had come to the palace ostensibly to collaborate on programs that could help children worldwide. Instead, they were using the meeting as an opportunity to mock and belittle a woman whose only crime was caring deeply about child welfare while daring to parent differently than they approved. James thought about his own mother, who had worked 2 jobs to support her family, but still found time to help with homework and attend school plays. He thought about the teachers who had believed in him when others wrote him off as just another kid from a rough neighborhood. He thought about the values that had guided him through military service and into his current role, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. As the voices in the drawing room continued their disguised assault on Kate's character, James made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't just going to stand by and listen to this anymore. What happened next would break protocol, challenge centuries of tradition, and prove that sometimes the most powerful acts of loyalty come from the most unexpected places. The morning sun continued to stream through the palace windows, but something fundamental had shifted. In the nursery, 3 children played peacefully, unaware that their mother was under attack. In the drawing room, Diplomatic facades were crumbling to reveal personal cruelty. And in the corridor, a working-class boy from Manchester who had sworn to protect the royal family was about to redefine what that oath really meant. James Mitchell had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, stood guard during terrorist threats, and maintained composure through countless diplomatic crises. But as he listened to the conversation in the drawing room deteriorate further, something inside him snapped in a way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with human decency. Dr. Morrison's voice had taken on an almost gleeful quality as she continued her assault. Your Royal Highness, I think what concerns many of us in the academic community is the precedent being set. When public figures without proper qualifications begin advocating for specific educational approaches based on personal parenting choices rather than established research, it can undermine the work of trained professionals. Kate's response came more slowly now, and James could hear the exhaustion creeping into her voice. Dr. Morrison, I've never claimed to be replacing professional expertise. I've spent considerable time working with qualified educators and researchers to ensure that any programs we support are evidence-based and professionally sound. Count Bertrand leaned forward with what appeared to be concerned sincerity, but felt more like a predator sensing weakness. But surely you must acknowledge that your public platform gives your personal opinions disproportionate weight? When you advocate for certain parenting approaches, people assume they're endorsed by the monarchy itself. That's the tremendous responsibility. It's a responsibility I take very seriously, Kate replied, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. The sustained criticism was wearing her down, exactly as intended. Dr. Morrison pressed her advantage. Then, perhaps you can explain why, if these approaches are so effective, your children seem to lack the composure and discipline we typically expect from royal children. During their brief appearance earlier, they seemed rather. She paused deliberately, uncontrolled. James felt his hands clench into fists. Those children had been perfectly behaved, polite, and charming during their introduction. Charlotte's proud curtsy, George's mature courtesy, Louis's infectious joy. They had been delightful representatives of their family and their upbringing. To twist that into criticism of their behavior was not just unfair, it was cruel. Inside the drawing room, Kate's maternal instincts flared at the attack on her children. My children were appropriately behaved for their ages. George is 8, Charlotte is 6, and Louis is 3. They showed respect, followed instructions, and engaged politely with adults. I'm not sure what more could be expected of them. Traditional royal children have always been expected to demonstrate exceptional composure and formal behavior, Dr. Morrison continued relentlessly. Perhaps the problem is that modern parenting approaches don't adequately prepare children for the demands of their positions. Dr. Chun, who had been growing visibly uncomfortable throughout the exchange, finally spoke up more forcefully. Dr. Morrison, I think we should return to discussing the actual program proposals. The Duchess has presented well-researched initiatives that could benefit thousands of children. But Dr. Morrison was far from finished. Dr. Chun, I appreciate your attempt to redirect, but these issues are directly relevant to program effectiveness. If the fundamental approaches being advocated haven't even produced ideal results in the advocate's own family, how can we expect them to work for others? This was the moment James had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. The attack had moved beyond policy disagreement, beyond professional criticism, into personal cruelty designed to humiliate and undermine. Kate was being systematically torn down by people who had come to her home, accepted her hospitality, and pretended to share her goals. James thought about the protocols that governed his behavior. Royal protection officers were trained to be invisible, to observe without interfering, to maintain strict neutrality in all matters that didn't directly threaten physical safety. His job was to protect the principal's body, not their feelings or dignity. Intervening in this situation would be a severe breach of protocol that could end his career and potentially create a diplomatic incident. But As he listened to Dr. Morrison continue her calculated assault, James realized that sometimes protecting someone meant more than just stopping physical threats. Kate's work on children's issues was genuine and important. Her parenting was thoughtful and loving. Her children were healthy, happy, and well-adjusted. She deserved better than to sit there and absorb this abuse in the name of diplomatic courtesy. The conversation inside had taken another turn for the worse. Count Bertrand was now speaking with the tone of someone delivering a sad but necessary truth. Your Royal Highness, perhaps it would be beneficial for all involved if you considered stepping back from direct involvement in educational policy. You could certainly continue to serve as a figurehead for these initiatives while leaving the actual development and implementation to qualified professionals. Stepping back, Kate's voice carried a note of disbelief. These programs are my initiative. I've invested months of research and consultation to develop them, and that passion is admirable, Dr. Morrison said with false sympathy. But passion without proper qualification can sometimes do more harm than good. The children's education field is complex and nuanced. It requires years of study and practical experience to truly understand. James had heard enough justification for cruelty to last a lifetime. In Afghanistan, enemies at least had the honesty to attack directly rather than hiding behind false concern and manufactured expertise. What was happening in that drawing room was bullying, pure and simple, dressed up in academic language and diplomatic politeness. He thought about the oath he had taken when he joined the Royal Guard, the promise to protect and serve the royal family with honor and dedication. That oath had never specified that protection was limited only to physical threats. In his heart, James knew that what he was about to do was exactly what his oath demanded, even if the rule book might say otherwise. Moving with the quiet efficiency that had served him well in combat situations, James approached the drawing room door. He paused for a moment, knowing that once he opened it and spoke, there would be no going back. His career, his reputation, his entire future would be changed by whatever happened in the next few minutes. But as he heard Dr. Morrison's voice rising again with another pointed criticism of Kate's qualifications and parenting choices, James knew his decision was already made. Some things were more important than career security or protocol compliance. Some moments demanded that good people stand up and be counted. James opened the door and stepped into the drawing room with the bearing and confidence of someone who belonged there. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Even in his formal guard uniform, there was something about his demeanor that commanded attention and respect. "Excuse me, Your Royal Highness," James said, his voice carrying the authority of 12 years of military service and royal protection duty. "I need to speak with you about a security matter." Kate looked up, confusion flickering across her face. There had been no security alerts, no threats or incidents that would require interruption of a diplomatic meeting. But something in James's expression told her to trust him. "Of course, Sergeant Mitchell," she replied, rising from her seat with visible relief at the interruption. Dr. Morrison's face showed irritation at the disruption. "Sergeant, surely this can wait until our meeting is concluded?" James turned to face her directly, his eyes steady and unwavering. "Ma'am, with all due respect, some matters cannot wait." The room fell silent, sensing that something significant was happening, but not yet understanding what. James had positioned himself slightly between Kate and the delegates, his body language subtly protective without being overtly aggressive. "Your Royal Highness," James continued, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I've been serving as your family's protection officer for several months now, and in that capacity, I've observed many aspects of your daily life and interactions with your children." Kate's eyes widened slightly, uncertain where this was leading, but beginning to sense that James was departing significantly from standard protocol. "I've watched you read bedtime stories, help with homework, comfort tears, celebrate achievements, and guide your children through both easy and difficult moments. I've seen you balance royal duties with hands-on parenting in ways that would challenge anyone, regardless of their resources or circumstances. Dr. Morrison attempted to regain control of the situation. Sergeant, this is highly irregular. We're in the middle of important discussions that don't require security input. James didn't even glance in her direction. His focus remained entirely on Kate as he continued speaking. I've also observed your children, ma'am. Prince George, who helps his younger siblings and shows kindness to everyone he meets. Princess Charlotte, who expresses herself with confidence, but also shows respect for others. Prince Louis, who brings joy to everyone around him while learning to navigate the world with curiosity and trust. The delegates were beginning to shift uncomfortably, realizing that this interruption was not routine and that James was building towards something that might directly concern them. These children are happy, well-adjusted, respectful, and genuinely caring individuals, James continued, his voice growing stronger. They reflect the values and guidance of their parents, particularly the daily involvement and thoughtful approach of their mother. Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, not from the earlier criticism, but from the unexpected support and validation coming from this man who had observed her family's private moments with professional objectivity. James then did something that shattered every protocol in the Royal Protection Handbook. He turned to face the delegates directly, his expression stern and his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had earned the right to speak truth to power. I've also been listening to your conversation for the past hour, he announced, causing several delegates to stiffen in their seats. And I feel compelled to point out that what I've witnessed here today is not professional discourse or constructive criticism. It's bullying, plain and simple. Dr. Morrison's face flushed red with indignation. How dare you? This is completely inappropriate. We're having a professional discussion about important policy matters. No, ma'am, you're not, James replied calmly. You're systematically attacking a woman's character, questioning her competence as a mother, and dismissing her genuine efforts to help children based on nothing more than your personal disapproval of her approach to parenting. Count Bertrand attempted to restore diplomatic decorum. Sergeant Mitchell, I believe you're overstepping your bounds here. These are complex policy discussions that require nuanced consideration. James fixed him with the kind of look that had once stopped enemy combatants in their tracks. Sir, I've spent 12 years in service, including combat deployments where I learned to distinguish between genuine professional disagreement and personal attacks disguised as expertise. What happened here today falls firmly in the latter category. The room was completely silent now. Everyone focused on James as he continued his unprecedented intervention. The Duchess of Cambridge has spent months researching early childhood development, consulting with experts, visiting programs, and developing comprehensive proposals to help children worldwide. She's approached this work with the same dedication and thoroughness she brings to all her royal duties. James paused, allowing his words to sink in before delivering his most pointed observation. Yet instead of engaging with her proposals on their merits, you've chosen to attack her personally, question her fitness as a mother, and suggest she lacks the qualifications to care about children's welfare. That's not professional critique, that's character assassination. Dr. Chun, who had been visibly uncomfortable throughout the meeting, nodded slowly in apparent agreement with James's assessment. James wasn't finished. I've served this family faithfully, and I've seen firsthand the dedication, love, and wisdom that the Duchess brings to both her public duties and her role as a mother. The suggestion that her children are poorly behaved or that her parenting approaches are somehow inadequate is not only wrong, it's insulting to anyone who has actually observed her family. Dr. Morrison stood up abruptly, her face a mask of outrage. This is absolutely unacceptable. We came here in good faith to discuss important educational initiatives, not to be lectured by security personnel about our professional conduct. James remained perfectly calm, his military training evident in his composure under pressure. Dr. Morrison, you came here as guests in the Duchess's home. You were offered hospitality, respect, and genuine collaboration on projects that could benefit children worldwide. Instead, you used the opportunity to launch personal attacks disguised as professional concern. Personal attacks? Count Bertrand scoffed. We raised legitimate questions about qualifications and approach. No, sir, you didn't, James replied firmly. You questioned the Duchess's competence as a mother, criticized her children's behavior despite their exemplary conduct, and suggested she should withdraw from initiatives she developed because you disapprove of her parenting style. None of that constitutes legitimate professional discourse. The tension in the room was palpable. Kate watched in amazement as this man, who had always maintained professional distance and protocol compliance, dismantled her critics with precision and unwavering conviction. James continued his defense, his voice steady but passionate. The Duchess has never claimed to replace professional expertise. She's consistently worked with qualified educators and researchers. She's invested her own time and energy into understanding complex issues because she genuinely cares about outcomes, not recognition. He turned back to Kate for a moment, his expression softening slightly. Ma'am, your work on early childhood development is important and well-founded. Your approach to parenting produces children who are confident, kind, and respectful. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise based on their personal biases or outdated notions of how royal children should behave. Dr. Morrison had recovered from her initial shock and was now visibly angry. Sergeant Mitchell, you have no authority to evaluate our professional conduct or dismiss our legitimate concerns. This intervention is completely inappropriate and will be reported through proper channels. James met her anger with steady calm. Ma'am, you're certainly free to report whatever you wish. I'm prepared to face the consequences of speaking up when I witness behavior that was unprofessional, unkind, and unproductive. Unprofessional. Dr. Morrison's voice rose. You're a security guard. You have no standing to evaluate professional conduct in educational policy discussions. This was the moment when James's working-class background, his military service, and his months of observing genuine dedication and love converged into something powerful and unshakable. You're right, Dr. Morrison. I'm not an education expert or a policy analyst. I'm a working-class kid from Manchester whose mom worked 2 jobs to support our family. I'm a soldier who learned to recognize honor and courage in all their forms. And I'm someone who has had the privilege to observe genuine care and dedication up close for months. His voice carried the weight of absolute conviction as he continued. I may not have advanced degrees or diplomatic credentials, but I know the difference between constructive criticism and calculated cruelty. I know the difference between professional disagreement and personal attack. And I know that what happened here today crossed every line of basic human decency. The delegates sat in stunned silence, clearly unprepared for this level of direct confrontation from someone they had assumed would remain invisible and compliant. Kate felt something she hadn't experienced in months of public criticism and diplomatic pressure. She felt truly defended and valued for who she was rather than what she represented. This man had risked his career and reputation to stand up for her children, her character, and her work. James wasn't finished with his unprecedented intervention. What he said next would be remembered and discussed for years to come, marking a moment when traditional protocols gave way to fundamental human values. James Mitchell stood in the center of that ornate drawing room, surrounded by centuries of royal history and diplomatic tradition, and did something that would be talked about in palace corridors for generations to come. He looked each delegate in the eye and delivered words that cut through pretense and protocol like a sword through silk. I want each of you to think about why you really came here today, he said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute moral certainty. Did you come to collaborate on programs that could help children around the world? Or did you come to tear down a woman whose only crime is caring deeply about child welfare while daring to parent differently than you approve? Dr. Morrison opened her mouth to respond, but James continued before she could speak. Because if you came here genuinely interested in helping children, then you've wasted an opportunity to work with someone who has both passion and platform to make real change happen. The Duchess has done her homework, consulted with experts, and developed solid proposals. She's offered you partnership and resources to advance shared goals. Count Bertrand shifted uncomfortably in his chair as James turned toward him. But if you came here to score points by humiliating a public figure, to make yourselves feel important by tearing down someone else's efforts, then you've succeeded brilliantly. Congratulations on using children's welfare as an excuse to indulge in petty cruelty. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Chen looked down at her hands, clearly ashamed of her colleague's behavior. The other delegates seemed frozen, unsure how to respond to this direct challenge to their conduct. Kate watched in amazement as James continued his defense, feeling a mixture of gratitude, concern for his career, and profound respect for his courage. I've served this country in war zones where people died for principles like honor, decency, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, James said, his voice growing more passionate. I didn't risk my life overseas just to come home and watch good people get torn down by bullies hiding behind academic credentials. Dr. Morrison finally found her voice, though it shook with anger. This is outrageous. We demand to speak with your superior immediately. This behavior is completely unacceptable. James smiled grimly. Dr. Morrison, you're absolutely right. My behavior is unacceptable according to every protocol in the book. I'm supposed to stand quietly in the corner while you systematically destroy someone's confidence and character. I'm supposed to pretend I don't see cruelty just because it's dressed up in polite language. He paused, looking around the room one final time. But sometimes being acceptable isn't the same as being right. Sometimes protecting people means more than just stopping physical threats. Sometimes standing up for what's right requires breaking rules that were written to protect the wrong things. Kate stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil of the past hour. Sergeant Mitchell, I appreciate your concern, but perhaps we should allow our guests to finish their presentation. James turned to her, and for a moment, his formal demeanor softened completely. Your Royal Highness, these people didn't come here to collaborate. They came to tear you down, and they succeeded in making you doubt yourself and your work. That's not diplomacy, it's cruelty, and I won't stand quietly and watch it happen. Count Bertrand stood up abruptly. This is completely unacceptable. We came here in good faith to discuss serious policy matters, not to be insulted by security personnel. Good faith. James laughed humorlessly. Sir, questioning someone's fitness as a mother, attacking their children's behavior, and suggesting they're unqualified to care about children's welfare isn't good faith. It's calculated intimidation. Dr. Morrison gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. We're leaving. This entire situation will be reported to the appropriate authorities. Sergeant Mitchell's behavior is completely inappropriate and unprofessional. You're absolutely right about that, James agreed calmly. And I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from choosing to defend someone who deserved better treatment than you gave her. As the delegates prepared to leave, Dr. Chun lingered behind, approaching Kate with obvious discomfort. Your Royal Highness, I want to apologize for my colleague's behavior. Your proposals have real merit, and your approach to children's welfare is both thoughtful and necessary. I hope we can find ways to collaborate despite what happened here today. Kate smiled gratefully. Thank you, Dr. Chun. I appreciate your professionalism and your support. Dr. Chun glanced at James with what might have been admiration. And Sergeant Mitchell, while I can't condone breaking protocol, I understand why you felt compelled to speak up. Sometimes moral courage requires taking risks. As the delegates filed out of the drawing room, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Kate sank into her chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to exhaustion and uncertainty about what would happen next. James remained standing, his formal posture intact, but his expression showing concern for the woman he had just defended so dramatically. "Your Royal Highness, I apologize if my intervention has caused additional problems for you. I know I overstepped my bounds." Kate looked up at him with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "James, you defended my children and my character when I couldn't defend myself. You risked your career to stand up for what was right. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me, ma'am. I just did what felt right in the moment." "But the consequences," Kate began, her voice trailing off as she considered what James might face for his unprecedented intervention. "I'll handle whatever comes," James replied simply. "Some things are worth the risk." Within hours, word of the confrontation had spread throughout the palace. Prince William, returning from his own official engagements, was immediately briefed on what had transpired. His initial reaction was complex, mixing gratitude for James's defense of his wife with concern about the breach of protocol and potential diplomatic ramifications. The conversation between William and Kate that evening was intense and emotional. Kate described not just the events of the day, but the months of mounting criticism and self-doubt that had preceded it. She talked about questioning her own instincts as a mother, wondering if her approach to parenting was somehow inadequate, and feeling isolated in her efforts to make a meaningful difference through her public work. "I started to believe they might be right," Kate admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "Maybe I'm too permissive with the children. Maybe I don't have the qualifications to advocate for educational programs. Maybe I should just step back and let others handle the serious work." William's response was immediate and fierce. "Kate, you're an extraordinary mother. Our children are happy, confident, and kind because of your love and guidance. Anyone who suggests otherwise is either blind or malicious." "But what about the programs? The criticism about my qualifications?" "You've done more research and consultation than most policymakers do in their entire careers. You've approached this work with intelligence, dedication, and genuine care. Don't let bullies convince you otherwise." The discussion turned to James's intervention and its implications. William's military background gave him appreciation for the kind of moral courage James had displayed, but his royal responsibilities made him acutely aware of the potential consequences. What he did was completely against protocol, William acknowledged. But it was also completely right. The question is how we handle this without destroying his career while also addressing the diplomatic fallout. Meanwhile, James spent that evening in his modest flat, fully expecting to be called in for disciplinary action the next morning. He thought about his military service, his years in the Royal Guard, and the decision that might end his career in royal protection. He felt no regret about defending Kate and her children, but he understood that breaking protocol in such a dramatic fashion would have serious consequences. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Instead of the disciplinary meeting James anticipated, he was summoned to meet with Prince William directly. This was highly unusual, as junior protection officers rarely had direct contact with senior royals unless specific circumstances required it. William received James in his private office, a more informal setting than the grand drawing rooms where state business was conducted. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile, and James found himself facing a man who was both his ultimate employer and someone who understood the pressures of military service. "Sergeant Mitchell," William began, his voice carefully neutral, "I understand you had quite an eventful day yesterday." "Yes, Your Royal Highness. I'm prepared to accept full responsibility for my actions and any consequences that result." William studied him for a long moment. "Tell me, in your own words, what happened in that drawing room." James recounted the events clearly and honestly, holding nothing back. He described the escalating personal attacks on Kate's parenting, the criticism of the children's behavior despite their exemplary conduct, and his decision to intervene when the situation became intolerable. "I knew I was breaking protocol, sir. I knew there would be consequences. But I couldn't stand there and watch the Duchess being torn down by people who were supposed to be her collaborators." William nodded slowly. And you felt this required your intervention because... James considered his answer carefully. Sir, I've served in combat situations where the mission was to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The Duchess was in a situation where diplomatic courtesy required her to absorb personal attacks without defending herself. Someone needed to speak up for what was right, even if it meant ending your career. Yes, sir. Some things are more important than career security. William was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing multiple considerations. Finally, he spoke with the authority of someone who had reached a difficult decision. Sergeant Mitchell, what you did yesterday was unprecedented, inappropriate according to established protocol, and absolutely necessary. You defended my wife and children when they needed defending, and you did so at considerable personal risk. James remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. The diplomatic fallout from yesterday's meeting is actually less severe than we initially anticipated, William continued. Dr. Morrison and Count Bertrand have lodged formal complaints about your conduct, but Dr. Chun and others have expressed support for your intervention and criticism of their colleagues' behavior. I see, sir. More importantly, the incident has sparked broader conversations about how public figures are treated by academics and policy experts. Several organizations have reached out to express interest in collaborating with the Duchess on her children's programs, citing admiration for both her dedication and your defense of her work. James felt a flicker of hope, but remained cautiously professional. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Kate and the children often played. I'm faced with a dilemma, Sergeant Mitchell. Protocol demands that you face disciplinary action for your breach of established procedures. But justice and common decency suggest that you should be commended for standing up for what was right. He turned back to face James directly. I've decided that you'll receive a formal reprimand for breaking protocol, which will go in your personnel file. However, you'll also receive a commendation for exceptional service and moral courage, which will carry considerably more weight for your future career prospects. James felt relief flooding through him, though he tried to maintain professional composure. Additionally, William continued, the Duchess has specifically requested that you remain as her family's protection officer. She feels that having someone who genuinely cares about their welfare, rather than just their physical safety, is invaluable. Thank you, sir. I'm honored by her confidence. William's expression grew more personal, less formal. James, what you did yesterday reminded us all that sometimes the most important service isn't about following rules. It's about standing up for people and principles that matter. That's not something that can be taught in protocol manuals. As James left the meeting, he felt a profound sense of vindication, not just for his actions, but for the values that had motivated them. He had risked everything to defend someone who deserved better treatment, and somehow that risk had led to a better outcome for everyone involved. The story of Sergeant James Mitchell's defense of Kate Middleton spread far beyond palace walls. News of the confrontation, sanitized for public consumption, but still powerful in its implications, sparked conversations about bullying, about the treatment of public figures, and about the courage required to stand up for what's right. Educational organizations that had previously been skeptical of Kate's involvement began reaching out with genuine collaboration offers. The incident had demonstrated her dedication to the work and highlighted the personal cost she was willing to bear for children's welfare. For Kate herself, James's intervention had been transformative. She had been reminded that her instincts as a mother were sound, that her work on children's issues was valuable, and that there were people willing to stand up for her when she couldn't defend herself. The children, blissfully unaware of the drama that had swirled around their brief appearance, continued to thrive under their mother's loving guidance. George maintained his thoughtful maturity. Charlotte expressed herself with growing confidence, and Louis brought joy to everyone around him. But perhaps the most significant change was in James himself. He had discovered that true service sometimes required breaking rules in service of higher principles. He had learned that protecting people meant more than just stopping physical threats. Most importantly, He had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of loyalty come from the most unexpected places. The morning sun continued to rise over Kensington Palace, but something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between those who served and those they protected. Protocol would always have its place, but human decency had been proven to matter more. In years to come, when young protection officers asked about the most important aspects of their duty, they would be told about Sergeant James Mitchell, a working-class boy from Manchester who reminded everyone that sometimes protecting people requires the courage to stand up and be counted regardless of the consequences. The story became legend within palace walls. The day a royal guard decided that defending what was right mattered more than following rules, and how that decision changed everything for the better.